Hello there and welcome back to another video. Now today's video I'm just going to be sort of giving a wrap up of what I've read for Women in Translation month, which finished yesterday. And I must say, I think towards the end of the month I definitely fell behind on the reading for Women in Translation. Mostly just because the books I had maybe weren't taking my fancy, and I had some other books that I wanted to read, but also at the end of the month, I don't know, I just had this blip in life, you know how these happen, so I didn't really do any reading at all. Yeah, so for like the past few days, my reading has actually been decreased by quite a lot, but hopefully soon I can catch up and get back on track. So obviously I'm just going to go through what I did read and share my thoughts on some of the books and let you know how my Women in Translation month went. So the first book that I read was this one. It's The Dog by Kerstin Ekman, and this one was translated by Linda Schenk and Rochelle Wright. This book was very different to what I was expecting, and what I was expecting was it to be like a sort of nice, beautiful mediation on man's relationship to nature, particularly told through this story of the orphaned dog or something. But then kind of what ended up happening was that, I guess for 75% of this novel, it's more about the dog who he gets lost. He goes out with his owner and his mum, or the puppy's mum, and then gets separated and is left to fend for itself. And then the puppy grows up in the wild, and I think for like a period over a year, you just kind of understand what the dog is doing and how the dog experiences the wildlife. During that first 75% of the novel, you get some really beautiful insights into sort of the natural life of Sweden. So you get to see the landscapes through the dog's eyes, you get to see the animals that kind of grow up around or that live in these areas. And yeah, I guess you kind of just get like a sort of an account of animals being wild and what they sort of do and how they need to survive and how they survive like the harsh winters and all of this stuff. So in some ways that was very beautiful and very touching, but it was also, maybe it wasn't because I wasn't expecting it, but I think perhaps it was just too long. I was kind of waiting for the dog to find the human. And then the human came along, and it was the same man who had originally owned the dog, found him and then sort of had to like retrain him and bring him back home. And so that last part, it was kind of touching, it was sweet, but it didn't really give you the sort of the classic tale of the unique bond between man and dog that I think the book promised it would have. So it did kind of miss out on that, but I think I still gave it 4 stars because I did enjoy it, and it was nice to read sort of that natural experience of Sweden, of a particular part of Sweden at least. And I guess if you're looking for sort of that fictional nature writing in a way, this could definitely satisfy that. But yeah, it's not something I would particularly sing about from the rafters. It was just a nice, cute read. I would recommend this as like a nice winter read actually, so something cozy to just curl up with. You can read it very quickly and just enjoy it for its simple pleasure. So then I read The White Book by Han Kang. Now this book, I think I gave it 3 stars in the end. I definitely did not enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed Human Acts by her. But I think I did enjoy it more than I did The Vegetarian. I think in this book, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's just not my cup of tea. It's not what I enjoy in literature, because it kind of like, blurs the boundaries between autofiction / memoir and prose fiction, but also poetry. So it kind of is like an amalgamation of these things. It's definitely more like an art object as opposed to a story or a book to be enjoyed, and there are photographs between it. I think I like the idea more than I like the execution of this book, and of course everything that's within this book relates to the colour white, and it is kind of expressing views and pontifications on life. It's quite philosophical in that way, and weaving memories with sort of expectations, I guess, all together based around the white. Sometimes some of the things are a little bit of a stretch, I think, how that she sort of forces it to be related to white as opposed to it feeling sort of naturally, organically kind of happening. But there were other times of like that's really beautiful and very impactful and meaningful. The photographs in the book did absolutely nothing for me. I think I just like, oh, okay, skipped it. And I just think that the order of the book or the way that it was structured didn't deliver for me personally what I think the book was supposed to deliver. It's just fine. I think as soon as I finished it, I was already forgetting it. So it actually hasn't stayed with me much at all. I can tell you maybe like one or two things that occurred during the process of reading it, but even then maybe I might have just made it up. It was fine, it is what it is, and that's more a personal taste thing as opposed to any commentary on the writing, because I think the writing was strong and solid. And then the next book that I read was Rue by Kim Thúy. Now this book, I think, this is kind of the book I was hoping that Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous would be. Of course, Ocean Vuong's book was a queer book, and this book wasn't. But I think it was just told, in my opinion, told so much better. I liked the perspective of it. I liked the neat way that it was written. It wasn't too messy, and I think the character was just very realistic and was an interesting character too, because she wasn't necessarily likable, but she wasn't unlikable either. She was just a very human person who had experienced something and was relaying that, but also sharing just general experiences and stuff. It was a bit like a jigsaw of a narrative in which, as you continued reading on, it built up a bigger picture, and you kind of felt the emotion, the hardship that the character had gone through. And yeah, I think it was an easy read. It was, well, I say easy read, it was easy to read, and it was very readable. It was something that made me want to pick it up and continue reading it, and I got through it quite quickly. It wasn't necessarily an easy read in terms of sort of the subject matter, etc. But I think it was delivered nicely. It wasn't too sort of satisfying some sort of misery porn desire. It was just delivered in a way that kind of didn't feel too emotionally draining, or that it didn't tax your own emotions too much, yet it still kind of had an impact and a power, like a very quiet power, which I really appreciated in that book. So I think, if you're looking for that sort of Vietnamese American immigrant storyline, although she immigrates to Canada, then it kind of has, then this book definitely will deliver that, and I think it's a very worthwhile book to read if you're looking for sort of those perspectives. And I'm really glad that I did read it. So then the next book that I picked up is one that I didn't actually list on my TBR, and that's Breast and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami, and this one is translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd. This book is basically about 3 Japanese women, 2 sisters, and then one of their daughters. They come from a working class family in Osaka, and they had a pretty tough life growing up because the mum was living below the poverty line, raising the 2 girls by herself, and the father shouldn't have been in the picture because he was quite dangerous or something like that, I seem to remember. And in this book is sort of like these women understanding womanhood, basically, or thinking about womanhood a lot. I must say, I counted this book as read and I gave it 3 stars, but I only actually read it up to where the original novella ended, because it was originally published as a novella and then she extended it as a novel. But when I finished it, when the novella read, I kind of felt like that was all I needed. I didn't need to continue reading, and I think it would have been a labour to have continued reading. Once again, this book was just fine. I really liked the concept of it and I liked what it was trying to do, but I think it was just a bit too dense, a little bit too navel-gazing, and I didn't really get on board because it was just the same thoughts being repeated over and over and over again. I think that everything that was trying to be delivered within this book was delivered very quickly and very early on in quite a decently done way, but then it just meant that it kind of then stagnated a little bit. I really like the setting and the way that it was written. I just kind of started to feel that this book was going to be a little bit repetitive, and that I couldn't gain any more out of it than what I had gained out of it, so I didn't see the point of continuing to read it. I wrote on my Goodreads that I think it was better to have left it as a enjoyable 3-star read as opposed to have kept on reading and ended it with an unenjoyable 2-star read or something. Because I've read the reviews, and the second part of this book, by the sounds of it, kind of loses the things that I enjoyed in the first half, but kind of still has the same things that I didn't enjoy running through it. So I was just like, it's not worth it. And we don't have to push ourselves to read things we don't want to, but I still counted it as read anyway. I also realised that before I read that, I did read Other Lives by Iman Humaydan. Sorry, I can't see the translator's name from here, but of course the translator's name will be down below. This book was the Lebanese book that followed Miriam as she kind of as she sort of travelled through different places and left parts of herself and other lives in these different places. But then I felt like that was kind of just more a forced thing, because Miriam grew up in Lebanon and lived there for I think like up to 30 years, and then she moved to Australia for a few years, got married, and then they moved to Kenya, I believe, or somewhere in East Africa. So they were living there, and then I think she had only been there for like 14. I think she had only been out of Lebanon for 14 years, but she was acting as if she had like spent her entire life traveling from place to place to place to place to place, and so it kind of didn't really feel that genuine. Like, it felt a little bit forced and contrived to express something without really kind of actually expressing that, or at least the actions of the character didn't match the feelings of the character, in my opinion. So I was a bit disappointed at what it was lacking, but what it did have was fine. I gave it 3 stars. It was just kind of a basic read. Miriam was an interesting enough character, but she was a little bit complaining and whiny in a way that started to frustrate me as it continued going on, and the choices that she made just didn't really make much sense to me, and so I kept on kind of just rolling my eyes or getting a little bit frustrated with the way this book was going, because for me it just didn't feel like it was telling a human truth or a human experience. It just felt like it was the author trying to force a philosophical thought, which bothers me, but it was still a fine enough read. So then obviously the book that was on my TBR that I didn't read was the book of Disappearance by Ibtisam Azem, translated by Sinan and Antoon. I just never got around to this book. There's something about the cover that I really don't like. I like the concept of this novel, but I hate this cover. So I found it hard to pick it up. And I think, after reading Other Lives, in my head I had kind of linked Other Lives and this book together, even though they're completely different books and set in different places and telling completely different stories. For some reason I had put them together in my head, so then when Other Lives was just a meh read, I kind of thought that this book was also going to be a meh read, so I never got around to it, and it's due back to the library soon, so I'm just going to take it back. I don't think I'll actually get around to reading it, which is a shame, I know, and I was kind of intrigued by it, but just not intrigued enough to actually pick it up. It was just sat on my desk and I kept on thinking, should I, shouldn't I, and then in the end I chose I shouldn't. Anyway, that's the video for today. I feel like maybe I'm a little bit, I feel like my voice is going a little bit. I've been a bit sick over this past weekend, which hasn't been particularly fun. So I'm kind of recovering now, and I just wanted to do something quick and easy and simple and deliver it to you. So I'll see you soon, hopefully when I feel better, for another video. Bye bye.